The afternoon rush at Westside Grocery Store was in full swing. The lines at the checkout counters stretched back into the aisles, shopping carts packed with groceries as people hurried to finish their errands before heading home. The store buzzed with the beeping of scanners, the rustle of plastic bags, and the low hum of conversations. Andre had been working at register number 4 for just over 3 years now. At 26, he wasn't where he had planned to be in life, but the job paid his bills and, more importantly, covered his night classes at the community college. He was studying business management, determined to work his way up to something better. The store manager had always positioned Andre at the front register because of his friendly demeanor. He had a way with customers that seemed to ease their impatience even during the busiest hours. His warm smile and genuine "How are you today?" made people feel seen in a world that often rushed past without noticing. "Next customer, please," Andre called out, maintaining his smile despite the fatigue that had settled into his shoulders after 6 hours on his feet. An elderly woman stepped forward, pushing a small cart with just a few items: a loaf of bread, a half-gallon of milk, a carton of eggs, some bananas, and a small package of cookies. Andre noticed her hands right away, weathered and slightly trembling as she gripped the cart handle. "Good afternoon, ma'am," he greeted her, the same way he had greeted every customer before her. But something about her made him pay closer attention. Perhaps it was the careful way she placed each item on the conveyor belt. Or maybe it was the worn but meticulously clean coat she wore despite the warm spring day. "Hello there, young man," she replied with a soft voice that carried the gentle drawl of someone who had lived in the South all her life. "Beautiful day we're having, isn't it?" Andre nodded, scanning her items with practiced efficiency. "Sure is. First real nice day we've had after all that rain." The woman, Ruth was her name, though Andre wouldn't learn that until later, watched the small screen displaying her total with anxious eyes. When the final amount appeared, $12.85, she opened her purse and began to count out her money carefully. Andre noticed how she separated her bills, counting them twice before handing them over. "That's $12, she said, then turned her attention to a small coin purse. The line behind Ruth had grown. A man in a business suit checked his watch and sighed loudly. A young mother with a fussy toddler bounced her child on her hip, trying to keep him from grabbing the candy displayed at the checkout. Andre could feel the collective impatience building, but he refused to rush the woman. He had seen this before: elderly folks on fixed incomes counting out exact change, sometimes coming up short and having to decide what to put back. His grandmother had been in the same position before she passed away 2 years ago. Ruth's fingers trembled more noticeably now as she counted her coins once, then twice. A small frown creased her forehead. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, looking up at Andre with embarrassment clouding her pale blue eyes. "I thought I had enough. I must have miscalculated." She began to sort through her items. "I'll have to put the cookies back. Maybe the bananas, too." Andre glanced at her groceries, all necessities except for the small pack of vanilla sandwich cookies that couldn't have cost more than $2, the kind his own grandmother used to serve with tea when he visited her as a child. He looked at the register screen. She was exactly 85 cents short. Without a moment's hesitation, Andre reached into his back pocket and pulled out his wallet. He slipped out $1 from his tip money and added it to her payment, all while continuing their conversation as if nothing unusual was happening. "No need for that, ma'am. We've got it all sorted out," he said quietly, keeping his voice low so the other customers wouldn't hear. Ruth looked up, confusion crossing her face as she watched him complete the transaction. "But Andre smiled warmly. "It's all taken care of. Would you like paper or plastic bags today?" The woman's eyes, clouded with cataracts but still sharp with awareness, studied his face. "You paid the difference, didn't you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's just 85 cents. Andre replied with a gentle shrug. "We all need a hand sometimes." The businessman behind Ruth cleared his throat pointedly. Andre could sense his supervisor watching from the customer service desk. He knew he should speed things up, but something about Ruth's dignity made him unwilling to rush her. "I can't accept that," Ruth said, though her voice wavered with emotion. "It's not right for you to pay for my groceries." "It's not your groceries, ma'am. It's just some change that was left in my register earlier." Andre lied smoothly. "Company policy says I have to use it up by the end of my shift." They both knew it wasn't true, but the explanation gave Ruth a way to accept the help without losing her pride. After a moment's hesitation, she nodded. "Well, if it's company policy, I suppose that's different," she said, the ghost of a smile playing at her lips. "Thank you, young man. You remind me of my grandson. He has a kind heart, too." Andre bagged her groceries carefully, placing the eggs on top so they wouldn't get crushed. He noticed Ruth was eyeing the cookies with a mixture of guilt and longing. "These are my favorite, too," he said, holding up the package before placing it in the bag. "My grandma used to serve them with milk. Made any bad day better." Ruth's face softened. "My late husband loved them. I don't buy them often anymore, but sometimes—" She trailed off, lost momentarily in a memory. Andre handed her the bags, making sure the weight was balanced so she could carry them easily. "Would you like some help out to your car?" Ruth shook her head. "No, thank you. I may be old, but I'm still capable. I take the bus and the stop is right outside." As she gathered her bags, Ruth looked Andre in the eyes. "What's your name, young man?" "Andre," he replied, already reaching for the next customer's items. "I'm Ruth. Ruth Bennett. I shop here every Tuesday. Perhaps I'll see you again." "I look forward to it, Miss Bennett," Andre said, and he meant it. As Ruth made her way toward the exit, Andre noticed something he hadn't before. She walked with a slight limp favoring her right leg. Yet she carried herself with unmistakable dignity, her back straight despite her years. The businessman who had been waiting impatiently behind Ruth stepped forward, already talking on his phone as Andre began scanning his items. But something had changed in his expression, a softness that hadn't been there before. As Andre handed him his receipt, the man paused his conversation to say, "That was a good thing you did." Andre simply nodded and turned to the next customer. But inside he felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the store's temperature. It was just 85 cents, less than $1, not even enough to buy a candy bar from the rack beside his register. But somehow it felt like more. What Andre didn't know then was that a teenage girl 3 customers back had been recording the entire interaction on her phone. She had initially been filming her friend making faces behind the businessman's back, but had captured Andre's act of kindness instead. By the time his shift ended that evening, her video was already gaining traction on social media. "Black cashier pays for elderly woman's groceries. Faith in humanity restored," read the caption. Andre drove home in his old Honda Civic, completely unaware that his small gesture was spreading across the internet. He was thinking about Ruth, about how her hands had trembled as she counted her coins, about the flash of shame in her eyes when she realized she was short, and about the quiet dignity with which she had accepted his help once he'd given her a way to do so without losing face. He thought about his own grandmother, who had raised him after his mother left when he was 8. She had worked as a housekeeper until arthritis made it impossible, then lived on a social security check that never quite stretched far enough. How many times had she been in Ruth's position? How many times had she put items back at the register, or gone without something she needed? As he pulled into the parking lot of his apartment building, Andre made a mental note to look for Ruth next Tuesday. Maybe he could set aside her favorite cookies. It wasn't much, but sometimes the smallest gestures made the biggest difference. He had learned that from his grandmother. That kindness wasn't about grand gestures, but about seeing someone's need and meeting it simply because you could what Andre couldn't have known was that this small moment, 85 cents at register 4 on an ordinary Tuesday, would set in motion a chain of events that would change not only his life and Ruth's, but the lives of countless others in their community. Sometimes the most profound ripples start with the smallest stones, and it all began with 85 cents and the simple recognition of another person's humanity in the checkout line of a grocery store. Week had passed since Andre's small act of kindness at register 4. The video of him paying 85 cents for Ruth had gathered a few thousand views online, but thankfully no one had identified him or the store yet. Life continued as usual. Early mornings, long shifts, and evening classes that left him exhausted Shorty determined. It was Tuesday again, just after 2 p.m. when Andre spotted a familiar figure entering the store. Ruth Bennett moved slowly down the aisles, leaning slightly on a weathered wooden cane that she hadn't been using the week before. Andre watched from his register as she carefully selected items, checking each price tag before placing anything in her basket. As the afternoon wore on, Andre kept glancing toward the aisles, wondering if Ruth would choose his line again, or if last week had been a one-time encounter. He found himself hoping she would come to his register, curious about how her week had been. Around 3:30, as he finished ringing up a young couple with a cart full of groceries, Andre looked up to see Ruth standing in line, waiting patiently with her small basket. There were 3 other customers between them, but she caught his eye and offered a warm smile of recognition. When she finally reached his register, Andre couldn't help but grin. "Good afternoon, Ms. Bennett. Nice to see you again." Ruth's eyes crinkled with pleasure at being remembered. "You have a good memory for faces, young man." "Only the memorable ones," Andre replied, beginning to scan her items, similar to last week's, but with the addition of some tea bags and a small container of honey. Ruth watched him work for a moment, then reached into her purse and pulled out a dollar bill, slightly worn at the edges. "Before I forget," she said, holding it out to him. Andre looked at it, confused for a moment before understanding dawned. "Oh, that's not necessary, Ms. Bennett. I insist," she said firmly, the soft southern lilt in her voice not disguising the determination behind it. "My mama raised me to pay my debts." Understanding that refusing would hurt her pride, Andre accepted the dollar with a nod of thanks. As he did, Ruth also handed him a small envelope. "And this is just a thank you. Not for the money, that was just coins. For the kindness. There's a difference." Andre placed the envelope beside his register, touched by the gesture. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," Ruth said simply. "That's what makes it a gift." After he'd rung up her groceries, totaling $14.32 this time, Ruth counted out her money carefully. "Exactly right today," she said with a hint of triumph in her voice. "I double-checked before leaving home." As Andre bagged her groceries, he nodded toward her cane. "Is your leg bothering you?" Ruth sighed. "Old joints don't much care for damp weather. I took a little fall last month and it's been slow to heal. The doctor says that's how it goes when you're pushing 80. My grandmother used to say getting old isn't for the faint of heart," Andre replied, making sure not to overload the bags. "Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman." "She was," Andre said, a hint of sadness in his voice. "She raised me after my mom left." "Passed away 2 years ago." Ruth's expression softened. "I'm sorry to hear that, dear. It's a special thing, being raised by a grandmother. They've already made their mistakes with their own children, so they're extra careful with their grandchildren." Andre laughed. That's exactly what she used to say. A customer behind Ruth cleared his throat impatiently, and Andre realized he'd been talking longer than usual. "Sorry to hold you up," he said, handing Ruth her bags. "Can I help you to the bus stop?" "Not today, thank you. My neighbor's daughter is picking me up. She works nearby." Ruth gathered her bags, moving carefully to balance them with her cane. "See you next week, Andre." After she left, Andre remembered the envelope. During his break, he opened it to find a handwritten note on pale blue stationery. "Dear Andre, thank you for your kindness last Tuesday. In a world where people often look past old women like me, you saw me as a person. That means more than the 85 cents ever could. With gratitude, Ruth Bennett." Andre carefully folded the note and tucked it into his wallet, oddly moved by such a simple gesture. The following Tuesday, Ruth arrived at the store at almost exactly the same time. This time, she deliberately chose Andre's line, even though others were shorter. "How was your week, Ms. Bennett?" Andre asked as she placed her items on the conveyor belt. "Well, the highlight was my book club on Thursday," she answered. "We're reading a mystery novel set in Georgia. Not my usual taste, but the company makes up for it." As Andre rang up her groceries, Ruth continued, "I taught English literature for 38 years, you know. At Westridge High School before it was torn down and rebuilt." "You were a teacher?" Andre asked, genuinely interested. "Indeed I was. From 1965 until 2003. Saw a lot of changes in those years, let me tell you." Her eyes grew distant for a moment. "Started teaching the year after integration. Those were difficult times, but the classroom was where we found common ground." As the weeks passed, these Tuesday conversations became a highlight for both of them. Andre learned that Ruth had been widowed 3 years earlier, after 52 years of marriage to her high school sweetheart, Thomas. She had 2 children, a son who lived in Arizona and a daughter in Florida, and 4 grandchildren who called her every Sunday like clockwork but rarely visited. Ruth, in turn, learned about Andre's night classes in business management, his dream of opening a small community bookstore cafe, and his struggles balancing work, school, and helping his younger sister with her 2 children. My sister works nights, Andre explained one Tuesday in early May. So I watch the kids 3 evenings a week while she's at the hospital. She's a nursing assistant working toward her RN. Family taking care of family, Ruth nodded approvingly. That's how it should. Their conversations never lasted more than a few minutes. The checkout line demanded efficiency, but they developed a shorthand that allowed them to pick up where they'd left off the previous week. Andre began setting aside the items Ruth bought regularly when they went on sale, keeping them behind the customer service desk with a note bearing her name. The store manager, Howard, noticed this developing friendship. One day he pulled Andre aside. That old lady, the one you helped with change a while back, she only comes in when you're working, did you know that? Andre hadn't realized. She's nice. Just lonely, I think. Howard nodded thoughtfully. My mother's the same way. Lives for her weekly hair appointment. Not because she cares that much about her hair, but because someone talks to her there. The following week, Howard made a point of greeting Ruth when she came in. Ms. Bennett, right? I'm Howard, the store manager. Andre's mentioned what a loyal customer you are. Ruth seemed pleased by the attention. This is a good store. Good people working here. Next time you're in, stop by my office. We're starting a senior discount program on Tuesdays. Thought you might have some input on what would be most helpful for our older shoppers. This small gesture, being asked for her opinion, lit up Ruth's face in a way that made Andre realize how rarely the elderly were consulted about anything. One Tuesday in late May, Ruth didn't show up during her usual time. Andre found himself watching the door throughout his shift, growing increasingly concerned. When his replacement arrived at the register, Andre asked to check the customer service desk, wondering if anyone had called. There were no messages. But as he was gathering his things to leave, he spotted Ruth entering the store. She moved more slowly than usual and her face looked drawn. Ms. Bennett, he called, walking over to her. I was worried when you didn't come in earlier. Had a doctor's appointment, she explained, her voice tired. Nothing serious, just the usual poking and prodding they like to do when you get to my age. But Andre sensed something was wrong. Let me help you with your shopping today. You're off work now. Surely you have better things to do. Nothing that can't wait, he assured her. As they moved through the aisles together, Ruth seemed to relax. She told him about her doctor's concerns regarding her blood pressure, the new medication she'd been prescribed, and her frustration with the mounting medical bills. Medicare covers some, but not all, she sighed. Thomas always handled the finances. Even after 3 years on my own, I still find it overwhelming sometimes. Andre hesitated, then offered, I'm pretty good with budgets. Had to be growing up. If you'd like, I could take a look at your bills. Maybe help you make sense of them. Ruth studied his face for a long moment. I'd like that, she finally said. But only if you'll stay for dinner afterward. I make a decent pot roast and it's always too much for just me. It's a deal, Andre agreed, surprised by how much he was looking forward to it. As he helped her check out and carry her groceries to her neighbor's waiting car, Andre realized that what had begun as a simple act of kindness, 85 cents at a grocery store register, had somehow blossomed into something neither of them had expected. A friendship that bridged generations, circumstances, and backgrounds, but was rooted in something as simple and profound as seeing each other's humanity. What neither of them knew yet was how much they would come to need that friendship in the months ahead, or how their Tuesday conversations would eventually extend far beyond the checkout line of Westside Grocery. The video had been online for nearly a month now. The teenage girl who recorded Andre helping Ruth had posted it with a simple caption, "This is what humanity looks like." At first, it had circulated mostly among her friends, gathering a few dread likes, but then a popular local community page had shared it, and from there, it began to spread. Andre had no idea he had become something of an internet sensation until Howard, the store manager, called him into the office one morning before his shift. Have you seen this? Howard asked, turning his computer monitor toward Andre. There on the screen was a slightly grainy video showing Andre at his register, discreetly slipping money from his wallet while Ruth counted her coins. Andre felt his stomach drop. Am I in trouble? Howard laughed. Trouble? This is the best publicity our store has had in years. Corporate actually called me about it. They want to feature you in the monthly newsletter. Andre shifted uncomfortably in his seat. I didn't do it for attention. Exactly, Howard replied. That's why people are responding to it. It's genuine. He clicked over to another page. Look at the comments. Andre leaned forward, scanning the hundreds of responses. This young man's mama raised him right. I'm not crying, you're crying. When my grandmother was alive, a cashier made her put back her tea because she was short 50 cents. Wish she'd had someone like this kind soul. Faith in humanity, restored. The video's been viewed over 80,000 times, Howard said. People are asking which store this is. Corporate wants to do something to recognize you. Andre shook his head. Please don't. I'd be embarrassed, and I think Ms. Bennett would be too. She's a very private person. Howard studied him for a moment, then nodded. All right, I'll tell them to keep it low-key. But they're sending over a photographer next week for the newsletter. Just a small feature. True to Howard's word, the story appeared as a modest feature in the company newsletter, with a photo of Andre smiling at his register. The headline read, Small gesture, big impact, how 85 cents made a difference. The article mentioned the viral video but focused mostly on customer service and community connection. Andre was relieved that Ruth wasn't named or pictured. Still, he worried about how she would react when she found out about the video. The opportunity to tell her came sooner than expected. That weekend, Andre visited Ruth's modest 2-bedroom home to help her organize her medical bills as he'd promised. Her house was small but immaculate, filled with books and framed photos of her late husband, children, and grandchildren. As they sat at her kitchen table sorting through papers, Andre broached the subject. Ms. Bennett, there's something I should tell you. Ruth looked up from the insurance form she was studying. That sounds serious. Andre explained about the video, showing it to her on his phone. Ruth watched in silence, her expression unreadable. When it finished, she took off her reading glasses and sighed. Well, she said finally, at least they caught my good side. Andre stared at her for a second, then burst out laughing with relief. Ruth's eyes twinkled as she joined in. You're not upset? He asked when their laughter subsided. Upset that someone showed people being kind to each other? The world could use more of that. She patted his hand. Though I wish they'd filmed me when my hair wasn't quite so wild. It was windy that day, if you recall. The following Tuesday, when Ruth came to the store, several customers recognized her from the video, which had now spread beyond their city. An older gentleman in line behind her insisted on paying for her groceries. No need for that, Ruth protested, embarrassed by the attention. Please, the man said. My mother lived on a fixed income. I know how tough it can be. He turned to Andre. Ring it all up together. Ruth reluctantly agreed, but as she left, she whispered to Andre, Next thing you know, people will think I'm some charity case. I don't want that, Andre understood her pride. I'll make sure that doesn't happen. True to his word, the next time someone offered to pay for Ruth's groceries, Andre smoothly intervened. Ms. Bennett actually started something we're calling our Community Care Fund. Instead of paying for her groceries, you can contribute to help others who might come up short. The idea caught on quickly. Howard approved an official donation jar at Andre's register, with a small sign explaining the program. Within 2 weeks, every register in the store had one. The first recipient was a young mother whose WIC benefits hadn't processed properly. When she came up short for baby formula, Andre discreetly covered the difference from the fund. The relief on her face reminded him of his own sister's struggles. Soon customers began coming specifically to Andre's line, even when it was longer than others. Some would drop their spare change into the jar, while others added dollar bills. A few shared stories about times when they had needed help or had been able to provide it. My car broke down last month, one middle-aged woman told Andre as she added $5 to the jar. Complete stranger paid for the tow truck. Said to pay it forward when I could. Guess this is me doing that. The local newspaper caught wind of the story and sent a reporter to interview Howard about the Community Care Fund. The article, which appeared in the Sunday edition, mentioned both Andre and Ruth by name, calling them unlikely friends who sparked a movement of kindness. Ruth brought the newspaper with her on her next visit to the store. My son called from Arizona, she told Andre with a mix of amusement and pride. Said he saw his mama's name in an article someone shared online. Can you imagine? The publicity brought more customers to the store. many curious to see the cashier and the elderly woman from the video. Some were disappointed to learn that Ruth only shopped on Tuesdays, but many still contributed to the fund. Howard reported to Andre that sales had increased by nearly 15% since the story broke. "Corporate's thrilled," he said. "They're talking about implementing the community care fund in other locations." The unexpected attention brought changes for both Andre and Ruth. A group of seniors from Ruth's church began asking her for rides to the grocery store on Tuesdays. Some had been struggling to shop on their own but had been too proud to ask for help. Ruth's neighbor, who had been driving her to the store, now drove a carpool of 4 elderly shoppers. For Andre, the biggest change came when a customer recognized him at the community college where he took evening classes. "You're that cashier, aren't you?" the man asked, stopping Andre in the hallway after their business management class. Andre nodded, expecting the usual comments about the video. "I'm Luis," the man said, extending his hand. "I own a small bookshop downtown. I've been looking for someone to help me modernize our operations, maybe set up an online store. Your professor mentioned you're good with both people and numbers. Would you be interested in some part-time work, more flexible hours than the grocery store, and more relevant to your degree?" The opportunity felt like a gift dropped from the sky. Andre began working weekends at the bookshop, learning the business from the ground up while applying concepts from his classes. Luis became both employer and mentor, sharing insights from 20 years of small business ownership. Andre still worked at Westside Grocery 3 days a week, including Tuesdays for Ruth's visits. The community care fund continued to grow, expanding to include a monthly food drive for the local shelter. One Tuesday in July, as Andre helped Ruth to her neighbor's car with her groceries, she mentioned something that had been on her mind. "You know, all this fuss about that video got me thinking," she said. "I spent 38 years teaching young people, trying to show them that kindness matters. But it took 85 cents and a stranger with a cell phone for people to really pay attention." Andre closed the car trunk and turned to her. "What do you mean?" Ruth's eyes were thoughtful. "I wonder how many small acts of kindness happen every day that no one ever notices. How many chances we all have to make a difference but miss because we're too busy or too focused on our own problems." "Probably thousands," Andre agreed. "That's why this community care fund matters," Ruth said firmly. "It's not about the money. It's about reminding people to see each other." "Really see each other?" She patted his arm. "Like you saw me that day." As he watched Ruth's car pull away, Andre realized that what had begun as a simple gesture, covering 85 cents for a woman who reminded him of his grandmother, had somehow grown into something that was changing not just their lives, but the lives of people throughout their community. And he had a feeling they were only just getting started. August arrived with a brutal heat wave that settled over the city like a heavy blanket. The air conditioning at Westside Grocery worked overtime, creating a welcome refuge from the sweltering temperatures outside. Andre noticed fewer elderly customers coming in during the worst of the heat, and he worried about Ruth and her friends. When Tuesday came around, Ruth didn't appear during her usual afternoon time slot. Andre kept glancing at the store entrance between customers, concern growing as the hours passed. By the end of his shift, there was still no sign of her. "Maybe she's just staying out of the heat," Howard suggested, noticing Andre's distraction. "Maybe," Andre agreed, but something didn't feel right. Ruth had never missed a Tuesday in the 3 months since their friendship began. After clocking out, Andre called the number Ruth had given him when he'd helped with her bills. The phone rang several times before a woman's voice, not Ruth's, answered. "Hello, Bennett residence?" "Hi, this is Andre from the grocery store." "Is Miss Bennett available?" There was a pause. "Oh, Andre, this is Patricia, Ruth's neighbor." "Ruth, scheduled me to call you, but I didn't have your number." The tightness in Andre's chest increased. "Is she okay?" "She's at Memorial Hospital. Had a fall last night. Broke her hip." The words hit Andre like a physical blow. He knew how dangerous hip fractures could be for someone Ruth's age. "Which hospital did you say?" he asked, already walking toward the bus stop. An hour later, Andre stood awkwardly in the doorway of Ruth's hospital room, a small bunch of daisies from the gift shop in his hand. Ruth looked smaller somehow against the white hospital sheets, her face pale but her eyes brightening when she saw him. "Andre, you didn't need to come all this way." He entered the room, placing the flowers on her bedside table. "How are you feeling?" Like I've been run over by a truck, she answered honestly. Doctor says I'll need surgery tomorrow. Then weeks of physical therapy. Her voice trembled slightly. They're talking about a rehabilitation center afterward. Said I can't go home alone right away. Andre pulled a chair closer to her bed. What happened? Ruth sighed. Something so foolish. The air conditioning in my house stopped working. I got dizzy from the heat and missed the last step on the stairs. If Patricia hadn't been coming over to check on me. She left the sentence unfinished. Andre stayed until visiting hours ended, making Ruth laugh with stories about unusual customers at the store and the progress of the community care fund. He promised to return after her surgery. Over the next few days, Andre visited whenever he could between work and classes. Ruth's surgery went well, but recovery would be slow. As she became more alert, her worry about finances became increasingly apparent. Medicare will cover some of it, she told Andre one evening, as he helped her organize the growing stack of hospital paperwork. But there'll be copays for the rehabilitation center, the physical therapy, medications. She looked down at her hands. I might have to sell the house. The house that held 52 years of memories with her husband. The house where she'd raised her children. The thought of Ruth losing her home on top of everything else filled Andre with determination. Let me look at all the bills first, he said. Maybe there are programs that can help. That night, unable to sleep, Andre sat at his small kitchen table with his laptop, researching assistance programs for seniors. The options were limited, especially for someone like Ruth who owned her home and had a small pension that put her just above the threshold for many aid programs. The next morning, as Andre stocked shelves before his shift, an idea began to form. The community care fund had grown steadily, with regular customers adding to it each week. What if they could do something bigger? During his break, Andre approached Howard. I want to organize a fundraiser for Ms. Bennett here at the store. Howard considered for a moment. What did you have in mind? A community event. We could set up tables in the parking lot on a Saturday, maybe get some local businesses involved. Donations, raffles, that kind of thing. To Andre's surprise, Howard immediately agreed. I'll clear it with corporate. They love the publicity the care fund has brought us. This is a natural extension. Planning began in earnest. Howard reached out to corporate for approval, while Andre created flyers and contacted local businesses for donations. The response was overwhelming. The bookshop where Andre worked part-time offered to donate a percentage of sales that week. A local restaurant promised to provide food for the event. Even competing grocery stores contributed gift cards for the raffle. Social media played a crucial role. The same community pages that had shared the original video now promoted the fundraiser. The local newspaper ran a follow-up story about Ruth and Andre, the friendship that inspired a community. When the day of the fundraiser arrived, Andre was stunned by the turnout. The store's parking lot was transformed, with tables set up around the perimeter, each staffed by volunteers. Many were regular customers who had come to know Ruth through her Tuesday visits. Others were people who had been touched by the viral video and wanted to help. Patricia brought a group of seniors from Ruth's church, including some who used the newly formed carpool system to shop at Westside Grocery. They set up a table selling homemade baked goods, with all proceeds going to the fund. By mid-morning, the event was so crowded that Howard had to call in extra staff to manage the store, which was seeing record numbers of customers. Many came specifically to contribute to the fundraiser before doing their shopping. The highlight came just after noon when a representative from Medicare Plus, a regional healthcare company, approached Andre. The woman introduced herself as Diane Fletcher, Community Outreach Director. We saw the article in the paper, she explained. Our CEO was moved by the story. He asked me to bring this. She handed Andre an oversized check made out to Ruth Bennett Medical Fund for $5,000. Andre stared at it in disbelief. I don't know what to say, Diane smiled. That's not all. We'd like to feature Ms. Bennett in our new senior assistance program. It helps people who fall into the gap, not quite eligible for full government assistance but struggling with medical costs. If she agrees, we'd use her story in our materials, and she'd receive additional support for her recovery. The fundraiser continued throughout the day, with a steady stream of visitors contributing everything from pocket change to substantial checks. By closing time, they had raised over $12,000, not including the healthcare company's donation. That evening, Andre visited Ruth at the rehabilitation center where she'd been moved after her hospital stay. Her room was small but private, with a window overlooking a garden. She was sitting up in a chair when he arrived, looking stronger than he'd seen her since the fall. "You did all this?" she asked when he told her about the fundraiser and showed her photos on his phone. "The community did it," Andre corrected. "People care about you, Ms. Bennett." Tears filled Ruth's eyes. "I spent my whole life in this town, taught generations of children, and now when I needed help the most?" She shook her head, overwhelmed. Andre sat with her as he explained the healthcare company's offer. Ruth listened carefully, asking thoughtful questions about what would be expected of her. "They just want to share your story with your permission," Andre explained. "And in return, they'll help cover the costs that Medicare doesn't." Ruth considered for a long moment. "All this because you paid 85 cents for my cookies," Andre smiled. "No, all this because you thanked me for it, because you saw me as a person worth knowing, not just a cashier. Because we became friends despite our differences." Ruth reached out to squeeze his hand. "When can I come to the store again?" "I miss our Tuesdays." "Your spot at Register 4 will be waiting whenever you're ready," Andre promised. "But right now you focus on getting better." As Andre left the rehabilitation center that evening, he reflected on how much had changed in just a few months. What began as a simple gesture had grown into something that had touched hundreds of lives, and was now ensuring that Ruth would be able to keep her home and get the care she needed. The next day at work, Howard called Andre into his office. "Corporate is impressed with the fundraiser," he said without preamble. "They're talking about implementing community outreach programs at other locations based on our model." Andre nodded, pleased but distracted by another thought. "That's great." Howard studied him for a moment. "There's something else. Regional management will be visiting next week. They're considering creating a new position, Community Outreach Coordinator. It would involve managing the care fund, organizing events, building relationships with local organizations." Andre looked up, suddenly alert. "A new position? Full-time? Better pay? More in line with your business degree?" Howard smiled. "They asked if I knew anyone who might be qualified." For the first time, Andre could see a clear path forward, one that combined his business education with his passion for helping others. All because he'd once paid 85 cents for an elderly woman who reminded him of his grandmother. Sometimes the smallest gestures created the biggest ripples. Ruth had taught him that. 6 months had passed since Ruth's fall. The harsh summer heat had given way to autumn, then to the crisp chill of winter, and now the first hints of spring were appearing around the city. The cherry trees outside Westside Grocery were budding, promising pink blossoms in a few weeks. Andre stood in the store's break room, adjusting his new name badge. It still felt strange to see Community Outreach Coordinator beneath his name instead of Cashier. Howard had pushed for the position to be created, and regional management had agreed after seeing the success of the fundraiser and the continued growth of the Community Care Fund. "Ready for the big day?" Howard asked, popping his head into the break room. Andre nodded, though his stomach was full of butterflies. Today marked the official launch of the store's senior shopping program, an initiative Andre had developed as his first major project in the new role. The program was simple but effective. Every Tuesday morning, the store would open an hour early exclusively for senior shoppers. Volunteers would be available to help with reaching items, carrying bags, and reading labels. The store would offer free coffee and discounts on staples like bread and milk. Transportation would be provided through a partnership with the local senior center, using the carpool system that had originated with Ruth and her friends. And speaking of Ruth, she was the guest of honor at today's launch. After 3 months of physical therapy and another 2 months of home health visits, she was finally able to walk with just a cane. Her recovery had exceeded her doctor's expectations, which she attributed to having something worth getting better for. The front door chimed as the first shuttle from the senior center arrived. Andre walked out to greet them, smiling as he saw Ruth sitting in the front seat, dressed in a pale blue blouse that matched her eyes, her silver hair neatly styled. "Welcome to Senior Shopping Tuesday," he said, offering his arm as she carefully stepped down from the van. Ruth beamed at him. "Look at you, all official with your fancy title." Andre laughed. "Still getting used to it myself." Behind Ruth, a dozen other seniors exited the van, followed by more arriving in a second shuttle. Many were familiar faces from Ruth's church and the rehabilitation center. Others were new, drawn by flyers distributed throughout the community. "Let me introduce you," Ruth said, guiding Andre to an elderly gentleman leaning on a walker. "This is Dr. Wilson. He taught chemistry at the high school when I was teaching English. We've been friends for nearly 40 years. Dr. Wilson shook Andre's hand firmly. "Ruth talks about you constantly. Says you're the one who got this whole thing started." Andre shook his head. "We started it together." Inside, Howard had arranged for a small reception area with coffee, tea, and pastries donated by a local bakery. The seniors gathered there first, socializing before beginning their shopping. Andre watched with satisfaction as store employees, including several who had volunteered to come in early, chatted with the elderly shoppers, offering assistance and building connections. Diane from Medicare Plus was there too, handing out information about their senior assistance program. True to their word, the company had featured Ruth in their materials and had covered much of her rehabilitation costs. Now they were expanding the program to help other seniors who fell into similar coverage gaps. "We've enrolled 15 new members just from this community," Diane told Andre proudly. "Ruth has been an incredible advocate." Ruth overheard this and smiled modestly. "I just tell them my story, how a broken hip could have meant losing my home if not for this young man and this community." As the seniors began their shopping, Andre moved throughout the store, making sure everything ran smoothly. He watched as a young employee patiently helped Dr. Wilson compare prices on canned soups, and another reached a box of cereal from a high shelf for a tiny woman with a floral scarf. Near the produce section, Ruth had gathered a small audience as she demonstrated how to check if an avocado was ripe. "Not too soft, not too hard," she explained, her former teacher's voice carrying clearly. "And the stem should come off easily to show green underneath, not brown." Andre smiled, realizing that in her own way Ruth was still teaching. She caught his eye and winked, clearly enjoying her new role as the store's unofficial senior ambassador. By 9 o'clock, when the store opened to the general public, most of the seniors had finished their shopping and were enjoying a second cup of coffee while waiting for their rides. The regular customers, rather than being annoyed at having to wait, seemed charmed by the program. Several stopped to chat with the seniors or to ask Andre about how they could volunteer next time. As the last of the senior shoppers departed, Howard approached Andre. "Corporate called. They watched the live stream we set up." Andre's throat tightened. "And they want to implement the program in all stores across the region by the end of the year. They're sending representatives next week to see how you organized it." The news was better than Andre could have hoped for. What had begun in this one store would now help seniors in dozens of communities. Later that afternoon, after his shift ended, Andre drove Ruth home in his new used car, a modest upgrade from his old Honda, made possible by his promotion. They had fallen into a comfortable routine over the past months. Every Tuesday after senior shopping, he would drive her home and stay for lunch. Sometimes they would go over her bills or medical paperwork, but more often they simply talked. Today, Ruth seemed thoughtful as she prepared tea in her small kitchen. Her movements were slower than before her fall, but she had regained most of her independence. "I had a call from my daughter yesterday," she said, placing 2 cups on the table. "She and my son are both coming to visit next month." Andre looked up, surprised. "That's wonderful. You haven't seen them in what, 2 years? 3, Ruth corrected. "Not since Thomas's funeral." She sat down carefully. They saw the article about the senior shopping program in that national magazine. Said they had no idea their mother had become something of a local celebrity. There was a hint of both pride and hurt in her voice. Pride at what she had accomplished, hurt that her children had been so distant from her life. "They're coming together?" Andre asked. Ruth nodded. "First time they've coordinated a visit in years. They don't get along well, you know. Different as night and day, those two." "Like my sister and me," Andre agreed, thinking of his own complicated family dynamics. "But they're making an effort now. That's something." "Yes," Ruth agreed softly. "That's something." She sipped her tea, then added, "My daughter asked if I'd consider moving to Florida to be closer to her. Said she could find me a nice assisted living facility near her house." Andre felt a sudden pang at the thought of Ruth leaving. Over the months, she had become more than just a friend. She was the grandmother he had lost, a mentor, and in many ways family. "What did you tell her?" he asked, trying to keep his voice neutral. Ruth set down her cup firmly. I told her my life is here. My friends, my church, my grocery store. She smiled at him. Besides, who would keep you in line if I left? Relief flooded through Andre. You scared me for a minute there. Ruth reached across the table to pat his hand. This old house has been my home for over 50 years. Thanks to you and this community, I can stay here. Why would I leave now when things are getting interesting? They both laughed, the moment of uncertainty passing. After lunch, before leaving, Andre helped Ruth bring in her mail. Among the usual bills and advertisements was a large envelope from Westside Grocery's corporate headquarters. Inside was an official invitation to the company's annual Community Partners Banquet, where Ruth and Andre would be honored for inspiring the senior shopping program. Will you go with me? Andre asked, though he already knew the answer. Wouldn't miss it, Ruth assured him. I'll wear my best dress. As Andre drove home that evening, he reflected on how much had changed since that Tuesday nearly a year ago when he had paid 85 cents for an elderly woman's cookies. He had a new position that combined his business education with his desire to help others. The Community Care Fund had grown into a model being adopted by stores throughout the region. Seniors who had been isolated in their homes now had transportation, assistance, and a renewed sense of community. And most importantly, he had gained a friendship that crossed generations, backgrounds, and circumstances, a friendship that had changed not just their lives but the lives of countless others. The next morning, Andre arrived at work to find a new donation jar at his old register. The cashier, a young woman who had recently started at the store, was explaining the program to a customer. It began with just 85 cents, she was saying. Our community outreach coordinator paid for an elderly woman's groceries when she came up short. That one small gesture turned into all this. She gestured around at the posters advertising the senior shopping program and the Community Care Fund. Andre smiled as he passed, not interrupting. The story had taken on a life of its own now, passed along like a cherished tradition. The specific details mattered less than the message, that small acts of kindness could create ripples that extended far beyond what anyone could imagine. And as he settled into his office to plan the next community initiative, Andre knew that this was just the beginning.